Okay, so I think we are here and live, and I am so excited to be here today with everybody. Hi, my name is Liz, and welcome to Team CMO's S'mores monthly campfire. We just gather once a month to chat about whatever topic is kind of trending or of interest or something that piques my interest. And so I just want to bring on a guest and have some conversation. So what I will probably do today is spend 30 minutes here on the YouTube live stream and then keep the folks that are on Zoom in here to have more conversation for the next 30 minutes. So those are the Team CMO insiders who are paid members of the Team CMO community. So hello, my name is Liz and I am Chief Community Officer for Team CMO. And I am thrilled to be joined by Yosef Levenstein today, who is going to talk to us a little bit about brand building. Yosef is CMO of, is it Golden Section?
Yes.
And you are a VC firm based out of Houston, is that right?
That is correct. And yeah, it's really exciting to be here, Liz, and thank you for having me on. And yeah, we're a venture capital fund in Houston. We invest in early stage B2B SaaS companies, and it's just great to be here.
Well, I would love for you to tell us what makes you an expert on brand. I hear that you maybe are overseeing a few brands, but tell me a little bit about where you came from.
Sure, absolutely. So I spent most of my career in the startup space, working for early stage fintech startups, primarily in B2B SaaS as well. And one of the things that I've learned in my experience, I've worked with several brands, I've consulted with many brands. So one of the companies I worked for was a marketing technology platform for investment management firms. And so working with some of the largest asset managers in the world and talking to them about how they position their brand through content. And over my career, what I've seen time and time again is how often brand awareness is overlooked and also how powerful brand awareness can be. And very often I've heard people say, well, brand awareness is only for the major corporations. And one of the things that I think we can talk about today is that brand awareness is important even for the earliest stage startups.
Yeah, I think that I was talking to my 15-year-old today about branding versus demand gen, things that he doesn't really understand. And he was like, well, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I said, well, what do you think when you hear of Louis Vuitton? He's like, oh, rich people, rappers, all this stuff. I was like, okay, now what do you think if you see a digital campaign for a 50% off coupon for Louis Vuitton? He's like, oh, well, I guess the rich people wouldn't want it anymore. Very good. So that was kind of our topic of conversation is how do you pair demand gen with brand awareness and make sure, because a lot of times in companies, I was at Fortune 500 companies for many years, and those are very separate departments. Like the brand team is not part of the demand gen team. So how do you even make sure that those get connected?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, I think that's one of the major changes that technology have brought forward to say that actually demand gen and brand need to work hand in hand. And I'll even say also, in general, marketing and sales needs to work hand in hand. And all of these bigger companies, it's definitely a lot harder, but that's why for earlier stage companies, even smaller companies, there's more of an opportunity there for sales, marketing, and then within each of those organizations, whether it's client success, account management, and new business, and also the branding and advertising sort of types of marketing that are in the organization really should all be working together. Because I think one example just in demand gen is like, well, you're creating demand, but at the end of the day, you need to be highlighting your brand and your voice and your mission and your values in all of that content that you're producing. And then on the other hand of it also is to say that, hearing what is resonating with your customers should be informing what you're saying also in your marketing. So there's all these things that tend to be broken up into silos, and at the end of that, what you're left with is marketing messaging that isn't even tied into what your clients are necessarily even looking for or saying to you. And so just all of that is really problematic. So I think going back to your original statement, like the fact is that demand generation and performance marketing or advertising, whatever you want to call it, really needs to work hand in hand with the brand part of the business.
Yeah. So when you first started talking, you were mentioning how important it is to really get a startup, have a strong brand when you start up. But quite often, I think I see startups start with a brand and try a brand and name it something with no vowels in it. And then how important is it to get it right the first time versus changing it along the way when you do get that customer feedback?
So it's a there's not like, I don't think a single answer to that question, but I think the key things are when you're starting off and you're establishing your brand, you got to move really quickly on that. And there's some really good creative agencies out there actually that help early stage companies establish their brand. So I'd say like there is an important element in establishing your brand and bringing that to market. And ideally it's something that people can pronounce and has vowels in it. But the other part of it also is it's like, looking at what the name is that you've chosen and actually just doing a quick Google search on it to see like, where do you end up, right? And I'll just sort of share like transparently, one of the things with Golden Section is that on Google, if you type in Golden Section, you're going up against a series of mathematical theories that have, it's almost impossible to dislodge them. So anyone who goes on Google and searches for Golden Section, they're going to first see like 10 to 15, maybe even more mathematical websites before seeing, B2B SaaS venture capital fund. And so once I realized that from a strategic perspective, rather than saying, well, let's change the name of this organization, which wouldn't make any sense. I just sort of thought about, okay, well, what is our target market going to be looking for? And if you go on and you Google B2B SaaS VC, we're the second result. If you go and you Google capital efficiency, we're the third result. So focusing on what I could control also, but going back to your point, and that is that to say, the name you choose when you launch your company should be something logical that people can get behind, and to very quickly also say, this is what our organization does. 2-3 years down the road, maybe 5 years down the road, can you do a rebrand? Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So nothing is set in stone. I've seen organizations that completely change their names, or you just do like, a rebrand. And I think that's totally fine as well. So moving quick and not spending a ton of time and money on establishing the brand is key for early stage startups, but also know that down the road, you can certainly rebrand yourself if necessary.
What about when you are managing a portfolio brand? So if you've got a bunch of, you would have some startups in there and you care about each startup's brand individually, you care about Golden Section's brand. So that one, makes sense why you're going to market your own, because you want to have credibility when you're bringing in new ones or when you're starting other things. What about when you're in a larger company though, and the brands are within your company? So I was thinking, even consumer brands, soft drinks or chips or something. So if I'm Coca-Cola and I've got my Coke and my Sprite and my Diet Coke, and they each have their own P&L and they each have their own CMO and they each are doing these things, how do you as Coca-Cola kind of make that decision of what brand takes precedence,
Yeah, and I think in the case of such a big organization, you as like the overall umbrella would probably look and see, for starters, what is having the most success as something to look at and prioritize. But I think that sort of helps you continue on the status quo. I've always been a big fan of looking at like the lower performing items and seeing like, what are the opportunities there, and not necessarily saying that you want to prioritize your sunk costs. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is like, if you have something that's a good product and it's not performing well, maybe that's an opportunity to prioritize. And using that example, but I think it's true even across like any sort of larger brand, right? The person that is buying Sprite is buying Sprite for a reason, right? Like I think about it, like, when do I buy Sprite versus Coke? Later in the day, maybe I want something a little bit more refreshing.
When I have a stomach ache.
When I have a stomach ache. Yeah, exactly. And then, but, so it's not necessarily that Coke is even competing in that realm. And I think so within a big organization, it's important to understand that each brand serves its purpose. And the reason you have a basket of brands is because they each do. And so, I really think from the umbrella organization, it's more looking across the entire basket, not saying like, okay, this is looking at it and saying what's doing well and maybe prioritizing that keeps the status quo. But I think the opportunity for upside is looking to see what's underperforming and how can we elevate that or potentially eliminate it if necessary.
And does that become more of a demand gen challenge than a branding challenge at that point? And it's really getting market share? Or
for the lower performing things, I think it's not necessarily about, so I'll take a step back and say like, before you can do any demand gen, you have to have brand awareness, right? Yeah. And that's where sort of, I think these two do go hand in hand. The example that I heard recently was coupons from Kroger's, right? They're sending out tons of coupons. We get them in the mail every day. We look at them and they end up in the trash, right? But at the end of the day, it also puts Kroger in front of our eyes. And so maybe at some point in time, we're going to choose to, go there for whatever reason, because we got those coupons. And so there's this brand awareness piece and also a demand gen piece. But, to sort of reinforce what I mean by that is to say, if you see something that's underperforming and you right away start to increase its performance by just diving into demand gen marketing, I don't think that's going to succeed.
Yeah.
I think that you have to first look at it and say, like, what is the brand? And even if it's going as basic as saying, like, what is the vision, mission, and values of this brand, right? And then figuring out, okay, have we done a good job conveying these elements of this brand in our marketing activities? So before we've even started to think about demand gen, it's taking a moment to think strategically and say, have we established brand awareness for this? And then if we haven't, then let's start with that. And in my experience, as a side note, I've seen brand awareness activity very often increases demand, right? It's a little bit harder to correlate because it's not meant to capture demand. But you start doing these brand awareness activities, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, hey, we in our case, again, we're in this sort of B2B SaaS space. So it's very different than consumer packaged goods. But, I went to this conference and everyone knew who we were. How magical is that? And it's like, well, no, it's not magic. We did some brand awareness around. And so I think yes, look at what's underperforming and see, have we done a good job at, creating brand awareness for this product or for this line of business? And if we haven't, then first start with brand awareness, and then you can layer on top of that the demand gen. And, I'm very much a digital marketer. And so I think about it and say, you run brand awareness, you're doing B2B branding, and you run a brand awareness campaign on LinkedIn, and you do something that's really compelling and educational and adds value both to the consumer, but also puts your brand front and center. Well, anyone who clicks on that really valuable piece of creative that you put out there, you can then retarget them, and then at that point you retarget them with something that's more demand gen.
Okay, so let's say that you have a portfolio of companies that are their own thing, and your portfolio owner company doesn't really you don't do marketing. And the one that comes to mind for me is Yum Brands, and I think they own, I don't know, correct me, but KFC and Pizza Hut and a whole bunch of restaurants. And so each of the restaurants get their own brand and all the things, but I don't see Yum Brands doing any marketing. I know that, when they purchase as the conglomerate and then send it out to things like point of sale systems or whatever. But how important is it to have a brand identity at the portfolio level or at the umbrella level?
I believe it's pretty important. I believe that, if you're, whatever the umbrella brand is, if your thing is that when you are purchasing these companies, investing in them or building them, you're focused on the client experience and the quality of the product, and you're doing that across all of the brands and services that you're offering, if someone knows that, the example I think about was in the 90s, right? You would go to a computer store and there were lots of PCs, but only some of them said Intel inside on them, right? And you're at least for me growing up, I was like, well, I want that Intel chip, and I'm willing on paying the premium for it because I know that sort of means, at least at the core, there's some quality there. And then, eventually the clone PCs, I mean, they're still around, but, really Compaq and those brands really did end up taking over the market, because you also knew, well, if I buy a clone PC, then I don't know what the other parts are going to look like. But if I buy a Compaq, I know that I have a certain degree of confidence that all the parts inside are going to be good quality. And so you look at that and you apply that to any business, and you say, you know what? I can go to, a random taco place, but if I know that, and, Yum Brands makes sure that Taco Bell serves the highest quality tacos, which I don't go to Taco Bell, but, I think that would be, that reinforces the brand for the under brands, where they say, okay, I'm in this portfolio, but I know that any company that's in this portfolio is of the highest quality. And where I see it is most applicable, at least here in Houston, where there's 10,000 or 15,000 restaurants, there are some hospitality groups, right? And those hospitality groups have, 10 to 15 restaurants in Houston. Those restaurants across the board are top performing restaurants, right? Each one is a very different type of menu, but because they're part of this hospitality group, you're rest assured that they're going to be high quality. And I think that's the opportunity for someplace like Yum, where if they're saying, our goal is to have the highest quality, fast food dining restaurants, then that can potentially elevate the brand of their portfolio companies. And I don't believe many of them do that right now. And I don't necessarily know, where quality and, sort of the quality of the product necessarily ranks for them, or the customer experience. But I think that's something that will evolve in the future. I mean, people are expecting more of businesses, and whether it's, how they are environmentally friendly or sustainable, I think people are also becoming a little bit more selective, because you don't have to go to Taco Bell's not the only place to go. At least in Houston, you can go to Taco Cabana and you're actually going to get a better taco than a Taco Bell, and it's comparable price, and it's self drive-through, and it's fast, and there's lots of different branches. And so there's going to be more competition, and people are going to be more focused on quality. And that's where the owner of these portfolio companies can say, you know what, we're going to really be focusing in on the quality of our products and the quality of our restaurants. And that's a way for them to elevate all the sub brands, because people will associate those portfolio company brands with the quality of the umbrella portfolio of the umbrella company.
Yeah, Melissa's saying that actually Yum Brands did do some brand work in the 80s aimed at Wall Street, being aware of the Yum ticker symbol. So there you go. That makes sense. Okay, yeah. Now what if you have, when I was CMO over portfolio brands, I had 4 different brands, and they did not compete with each other. So they were kind of complementary, and we could use them with each other. But what if I am overseeing a brand? Let's say I have a digital lead generation agency, and then I decide that in order to round out my portfolio, I'm going to acquire, let's do a creative agency and I don't know, something else, like a swag company or something like that, right? So for me as a portfolio, these are 3 acquisitions that are going to work really well for me together, and I can use them. However, I find out that my lead gen clients are actually a whole lot of creative agencies. And if I start telling them I just acquired a creative agency, they're going to get very angry with me and not want to work with me anymore, because now I'm competition to them. So how do I manage my brands? Do I ignore all of those people and just forget it and come out as one big brand now? Or do I keep them separate so I don't anger 50% of my clients?
Yeah. So, in a scientific vacuum, I say honesty and transparency is always the best approach. And so, these companies are going to find out at some point that one of your business is somewhat competing with them. And so, being straight out, being really forward and getting ahead of it and saying this is the business, but it's not going to touch any of your business. And there's a Chinese wall between our businesses. And it's just a way for us to add value to the companies that don't have your services. Then, I think that's a part of that strategy. I think, the more I look at the evolution of marketing from, you can go back to the 20s, but if you really look into the 50s and 60s to today, a lot of marketing is really about being honest with the customer, right? And not, trying to be as transparent as possible, especially in the newer brands that are sort of coming into the market. And so in that scenario, I would say, there's definitely, not necessarily on day one, but I do think that there's an opportunity to discuss with your partners, what the logic is behind the business, and why you've done it, and sort of explain to them the logistics and the Chinese wall. And I think on the other side of it, being realistic as a business owner and understanding that this is going to churn these competing businesses out of your portfolio, but you've made a strategic decision that says this is a key part of having my business operate. And so, I'd say before making the acquisition, taking that into account, but saying this is a strategic decision. We understand that there's going to be implications in the short term, but I would say hiding it is only going to hurt you in the long run, especially in these types of businesses that are based on trust and your reputation. And so, it's challenging for sure, but I think this is where marketing steps in. And this is where, very often I would say marketing is overlooked, but this is where marketing can step in and say, well, there's a story to be told here, and how we communicate this to the creative agencies that, are going to view this as competition, is going to be so critical. And being thoughtful and intentional in how you communicate that to them is what's going to make a big difference. But at the end of the day, you've made a strategic decision on what's the best for the long-term health. And so I say market these services after you've communicated it to your existing partners, so that they understand what's going on and they're not completely blindsided by it. And that's where you can really lean into your marketing leadership to say, how do we communicate this? What's the story? How do we go about it? And then, very quickly moving to, okay, now how do we communicate to our prospects the nature of this new business and the value we can provide to them?
So when you've acquired companies, what should be your thought process? And when you eliminate the brand of the ones that you've acquired and kind of roll them into the one that has the most brand equity or the one that people recognize the most, and what do you need to think about?
So, I think obviously there's the founder of the company that you've purchased, right? Like, how are they going to feel about being rolled into this? And the human element to me is something that I always try to start from. Like, how are they going to feel, right? And obviously you need to do what is right for the business, but you do want to be taking that into account. And very often I've seen with founders that they do really, the brand it's one and the same, right? Like the statement of it's not personal, it's business doesn't apply when you're a founder. It is personal and it is business when you're a founder. But at the same time, I think there's a realistic necessity that there's only one real brand. I think when there's an opportunity, though, when you do roll a service into your business, that you can maintain some elements of that brand name inside of this service, right? And it even is potentially some way where you differentiate yourself. And so if you purchased a creative agency, right, you can, instead of just saying like, this is the creative line of the business, you can incorporate the brand or some elements of the branding that made that brand agency appealing to you to purchase, and to its successful existing business into the new branding. So whether it's going to be, creative agency powered by, or our brand is powered by this creative agency, I think there are ways to incorporate that branding into like the main brand of the organization. But I think even with that, and this is true with all things in marketing, like you experiment with and you see, does this create confusion amongst people? Does this create friction amongst people? And be flexible and understand that not on day one, but if you see that 6 months in that the brand is that sort of structure is creating some confusion, then you may want to try something else. But I do think that if you have a service line that's based on an acquisition, that you can incorporate the branding from the acquisition into it. You still need to apply the overall brand guidelines of the parent organization into that, but it doesn't mean that you have to just eliminate everything just because you've incorporated them and brought them into your business.
Yeah, I think about the people part of what you're saying quite often. I was at IBM and I came in right after the Cloudant acquisition, which had kind of the 1-year prime directive, do no harm, and then became IBM Cloud Services. And there was no more such thing as Cloudant. And then another year went by and then it was just part of cloud, hybrid cloud, all these things. It was just kind of gone. And clearly the technology still existed, but that, how does that feel as the person who got acquired and then you just kind of see your brand and company disappear? So that process from a founder perspective, how do you deal with that?
Right, and that's why the gradual process is probably the best way for them to at least handle it from a personal side. I think also it's not just the founder, right? A lot of the times, especially in smaller organizations, the people that built up that organization that aren't necessarily founders also have a strong tie to that organization. If you want them to stay on board, right, you need to give them something to be a part of. But at the end of the day, they are also now, in like in IBM's case, part of like a massive organization. And so there is a need to integrate the brand into the broader organization, because the last thing you want is, people may say, well, with Apple, they had Steve Jobs had his pirates or whatever, that sort of like isolated team. Okay, but what worked for Steve Jobs and Apple doesn't necessarily work for every other company out there. And so the reality is that having a single brand, I'm eliminating silos as much as possible. And if people sort of, if the employees of the acquired brand, round up around their team and aren't part of the broader team, that'll have also like long-term damage to the organization. And so I still think like there's an opportunity to incorporate the brand, but yeah, I think realistically over time, that brand is going to be less and less known. New clients are going to come in that have never heard of it. Other people are just going to buy the service and not even realizing that it's something separate. So it's just a matter of time until the brand dissipates. And if you don't want your brand to disappear, then don't sell your company. But if you're going to sell your company, there's a variety of reasons why people do. Like I think it's just sort of part of that. And in some organizations, like if you were the founder of Taco Bell and you got bought by Yum, like, yeah, the Taco Bell brand is going to live on. But a lot of the time, if you're a service, if you have some piece of software that a bigger software company incorporates into their brand, like, yeah, initially you may be able to hold on to it, but over time, your team is going to be part of the organization. Your brand is going to be part of the organization. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's actually a pretty good thing, because that means you're fitting into their business and it's continuing to grow. Most of the time, or a lot of the time with these mergers and acquisitions, that doesn't play out. They end up scrapping it or just taking one little piece of the technology and keeping that and getting rid of everything else. So if your team is still there and your service is still there over time, like you should be happy. You can be very happy that you've been able to build something so valuable. But yeah, like you said, 2 to 3 years in, it's very likely that the brand goes away. But I will say that I don't think just getting rid of the brand right off the bat is a good idea either. I think if there's a way to incorporate it, powered by, or or just sort of keeping the brand incorporated into like the service in some way. And I do think that's a valuable approach for brands to consider, just in the sense of also making that merger and acquisition as likely as possible to succeed.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, switching gears just a little. So I can or cannot ask your opinion on if you think we're in a down market, but if a lot of people talking about being in a down market right now, how would you go about looking at your marketing spend? Are you going to put it more in branding right now, knowing that sales are down a bit, people are laying off marketing teams, or all this stuff? So do you switch to more of an always on brand campaign for when things come back and kind of focus on R&D right now? Or do you really go hard at demand gen, knowing that everyone else has cut their budget back and now maybe you stand a chance as being the only one out there?
So in our industry, it's a little bit different, obviously, because our product is capital, right? And so in a market like this, there's more people looking for capital than ever. So it's a little bit different. And the good news is that we're still investing. And for other founders out there, I'll just say, especially in like the early stage, or even just in the startup universe in general, like there's a lot of money in venture capital and private equity right now. And so the notion of this down market, it's not. I don't look at it as a forward-looking down market. I look at it as people made a lot of really stupid investments between 2019 and 2021, and those investments are just being shook out. And the investment managers are sitting on a lot of capital, and they're looking to invest in good companies. And just that the change now is that those stupid investments are happening less, and people on the investment side are a lot more particular about the companies they're investing in, and a lot of different factors that were being overlooked. Fortunately, we didn't overlook them when we were investing in 2019, but a lot of other investors did. So from that sort of side of it, I say like the down market. Now, the other side of it is for the actual software companies. There's definitely going to be less buying of services from the companies, because they're sort of trying to figure out what's going on next.
Yeah.
So, I think for the the service providers, or sort of the software companies out there, the sales cycles are going to be longer. And so what I would say, to answer your question in terms of like how to position marketing, like I said earlier, I've always prioritized brand awareness. And so I think the cardinal mistake any organization would make right now is cutting out brand awareness. But my guess is, and again, not in our case, but I think for a lot of other organizations, like I've heard people throw around some really silly numbers of what they were spending on marketing. And some of them with good results, some of them, not. And so I would say, if you're going to be repositioning your budget, I think assuming that marketing budgets are going to be slashed is absolutely reasonable, because that's just what happens in a downturn. Marketing is the first thing to take a hit. Yeah. But I would say, be more thoughtful in terms of like what your marketing strategy looks like, where you previously may have been able to throw money, or be less, thoughtful about how you're positioning things. I think there's a lot of capital efficiency that can be applied to marketing spend. And so really looking at how, your campaigns have performed, and really thinking about the things that matter. At the end of the day, marketing has to be a revenue generating department. And so even brand awareness, you need to look at it and say, like, how has this impacted business? Where are the areas that I've seen more success? Where are the areas that I've seen less success? And yeah, pare back on your losers, and not necessarily, you may not be able to double down on your winners, but at least keep your winners going, because you're right. Like, things will turn around. And you don't want to have to rebuild you don't want to have to rebuild your marketing team in a year from now, when all of a sudden things are moving again. And you definitely don't want to have to restart your marketing campaigns. So I think it's really just a matter of looking at where your dollars are being spent right now and really being thoughtful about it. And depending on the industry you're in, also looking at the different channels that are available. And again, how are you using those channels? And just be really, really thoughtful of that. But do not, unless you have absolutely no choice, do not cut your brand awareness campaigns. The demand generation side, that's unfortunately, I'll say, like, is where if I were to cut anything, it would be on that side, because those tend to be a lot more expensive. And the reality is that even the opportunities that come in are going to move a lot slower, which means that, you know, either you're going to get pushback from sales saying that the leads aren't good, which isn't true. It's just that the market is slower. But in general, those campaigns are more expensive. So I think you can really be efficient if you sort of focus in a little bit more on brand awareness, and then think about how you're positioning your brand awareness in a way that can still drive revenue for your business.
Yeah. Okay. And so do you focus a little bit more on organic, maybe ABM kind of tactics to people you already know?
ABM is expensive also. That's one of the interesting things. Like, it's one of those things that came about when there was a lot of money, but ABM means that you're taking a skilled employee and having to spend a lot of time on one-to-one communications. So yes, organic for sure. I'd say, like, definitely taking a look at your SEO, but I'm talking about just really looking at like your Google AdWords, and depending on what you're like, in our world, it's LinkedIn. Like, we're B2B, and, you know, our portfolio companies are all B2B. And so, you know, it's really Google AdWords and LinkedIn. And so it's really looking at those two channels and saying, like, how can I be, you know, whatever my budget is, right? Like, don't put it to zero, but whatever the budget is, you know, how can I be really effective in that? And so in both of those channels, which I'm fairly familiar with, LinkedIn and Google AdWords, I think the way I would look at it is like, you know, the targeting, you know, being really, really like focused on like tying in your ICP to your targeting. I would say that, you know, the geographies that you're looking at are also really important, right? So doesn't mean turn off brand awareness, but it does mean, like, if you're doing brand awareness, be really thoughtful of like, where are the geographies and what are the audiences that you want to be targeting, and making sure that your marketing tech stack is tight. Obviously, it's sort of like the first point, that everything is talking to each other, but really looking and saying, okay, like, maybe, you know, I don't need to be doing brand awareness in the entire United States, because we see that a lot of our prospects are in Florida. Okay, well then, like, really don't do that, and target it on Florida, both on Google AdWords and on LinkedIn. So, you know, just marketers, we're creative by nature. And so it's time to be, you know, it's a time like this where you can be creative and focus in on the data, and where is the revenue coming from, and then where is the data sort of pointing you towards, to say, this is where our limited budget can be focused, so it can still have an impact.
I think that's great advice. So pause, do a little strategy work, and then come back with the new plan as we go into the second half of the year. Well, Yosef, I know that you need to hop in the car and head out. I just want to thank you so much for stopping by and chatting with me. This was really fun. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It was awesome. And I enjoyed this, and I hope this was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we as marketers, like, one of the things that I always emphasize is, like, you know, if the organization doesn't value the work you do as a marketer, then you know, to some degree, it's on you as a marketer to really make sure that they do, but also, like, be aware of that, because I look at marketing as the most critical part of a business, right? And you know, we tie together HR, we tie together sales, we tie together the brand, obviously. And so I know, like, times like this, it's hard, but I've been through this before, and, like, you know, 2007, 2008, and, you know, later in the mid, you know, 2010s, like, there's always these sort of times where, like, the market slows down and marketers take a hit. But the good news is that it usually turns around, and the people that do slash their marketing teams, they eventually will come back scrambling, and it becomes really good to be a marketer. So, you know, tough times for sure. I don't think this is nearly as bad as 2007, 2008. I think this is just sort of like a bizarre time. It's an unprecedented time economically. But I think all of us need to just sort of hang in there and be strong, and I think it'll be okay. But I do think, like, thinking and then doing, and really focusing on, like, how you can be capital efficient with your marketing spend is critical for the next at least, like, 6 to 18 months.
That's great. All right. Well, we're in this together, Team CMO. Join us at teamcmo.com. If you're not part of the community yet, sign up. And if you want to be a Team CMO insider, we'd love to have you in these. So I'm going to stop the live stream, and then those of us in the room can keep chatting. Thank you so much, Yosef.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.